Good day to all our viewers across the 21 APO member economies. My name is Anar Bayar-Seha from APO Secretariat. Welcome to today's APO Talk, and thank you for joining us. The Asian Productivity Organization continues working closely with governments to strengthen public sector performance, build resilient institutions, and deliver better public services. Around the world, the public sector leaders face rising expectations, rapid technological change, and complex policy change. Because of this, improving productivity and fostering innovation are now essential for effective governance. Today's session brings together insights, examples, best practices, and more practical experiences on how innovation can transform public sector culture and productivity. Our topic today focuses on building a culture of productivity and innovation in public sector. What it is, why it matters, and how it is evolving across APO member economies. We will explore how governments build cultures that support innovation, how innovations improve productivity, and why public sector innovation is different from innovation in private sector. We will also highlight the key drivers and barriers along practical examples of APO members. Today's talk will help us understand why innovation must be a strategic imperative for modern governments and how it can be integrated into everyday public sector practice. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Professor Jenny M. Levice. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Anna.
So Professor Emerita Jenny in School of Social and Political Sciences at University of Melbourne, Australia. Professor Jenny is an elected Fellow of Academic Social Science Australia and is recognized globally for expertise in public sector innovation, policy making, and policy design. In 2025, she received the Australian Political Studies Association Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2023, she received the Routledge Lifetime Achievement Award from International Research Society for Public Management. She previously served as Academic Director for Scholarly and Social Research Impact at University of Melbourne and as a Research Director of Melbourne School of Government. Professor Jenny was the founding director of the Public Policy Lab, flagship and innovative initiative advancing evidence-based policymaking. Professor Jenny is the author of 6 books, including 2 on public sector innovation, and more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She has worked in Denmark and UK, and also worked in the Victorian Department of Treasury and advised national, state, and municipal governments in Australia. Now it is our great pleasure to welcome Professor Jenny, who will share her insights with APO member economies today. Please, Jenny.
Thank you very much for that very nice introduction, Anna. It's a great pleasure to talk about this topic today of building a culture of productivity and innovation in the public sector in APO member economies. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, I'm going to mention a little bit about what innovation in the public sector means in terms of some background definitions of the types of public sector innovations that we see around the world. And then I'm going to outline the objective and approach of this particular project, which we're doing for the Asian Productivity Organization. In the second part, I'm going to speak about the innovations that have generated improvements in productivity and innovation structures, processes, and outcomes for the public sector. And this part comes from our APO member economies who've been contributing to this project. So we're talking about how we went about identifying best practice cases of improvement and about the context in which those public sector innovations were occurring. The third part of the talk, I will speak more specifically about the types of innovations associated with success. And this is where we focus on some of the best practice examples we've gained from the APO member economies as part of this project. And I'll also speak a little bit about synthesizing the findings from this project. And then finally, at the end, in the fourth part, I will speak about building an innovation culture and what supports that in the public sector and in APO member economies, but also more generally in all countries around the world. So, first section, as I mentioned just now, is on innovation in the public sector. So here is some important background information and definitions. It's very clear over the last 2 or 3 decades that worldwide we really need to focus on public sector innovation. And I interpret that to mean as really on building a productivity and innovation culture in the public sector. And that is the focus of this APO project. We want to achieve better, smarter governance. There's a lot of pressure on government from many directions, and innovation is one of the ways that we try and address some of the pressing challenges facing nations around the world, and particularly in the Asia Pacific. So the most basic definition is that innovation is simply the introduction of something new. But innovation is also the implementation of that idea. So you can create something new and nothing happens to it, but innovation really only happens when that creative thought turns into something that is implemented. And of course, the desired outcome of innovation is that there is some kind of improvement for citizens, be that in a new product or a new set of processes and services. Really what we're looking for is a benefit to society. The definition I have in here from Chaminade and colleagues, I think, is a really useful one to think about public sector innovation. And it refers to an innovation system approach, which is really a kind of ecosystem approach. Innovation here is an open, evolving, and complex system that encompasses relationships between organizations, institutions, and socioeconomic structures, which determine the rate and direction of innovation and competence building emanating from processes of science-based and experience-based learning. So I think this really captures the notion that innovation can't just happen in a vacuum. There's many, usually, organizations and people involved, and those relationships are really important, and they do come from processes of both science-based or evidence that we find and learning on the job, if you like, trying things and seeing whether that actually helps or not. There are lots of different types of public sector innovations, and this is a kind of helpful review by Hannah de Vries and some other colleagues from the Netherlands who surveyed the literature on public sector innovation and produced this paper in 2015. And what they found was that almost half of the types of public sector innovation, at least that were mentioned in the literature, are about process innovations, mostly internal administrative processes, technological processes. That's probably accelerated quite a lot in the 10 years since this paper was published. But things like, restructuring, organizing things in a different way, introducing digital versions of processes that were previously paper-based, that accounts for about half of the types of public sector innovations. And the next most frequently mentioned type are product or service innovations. So things like changing a way that something is delivered in a service setting, in a healthcare setting, in an aged care setting, whatever it is, the way that that service is actually delivered, the innovation will be directed at that rather than something like an internal administrative process. And the third one is what they call governance innovations. So this refers more to a higher level understanding of changing policy, changing governance structures, thinking about the necessary skills development, for example, that people who work in the public sector might need in order to make innovation happen, and internal organizational structures that support innovation. And the final one, which is the least frequent, is about conceptual innovation, because this is a big change when governments are actually making a grand statement about what they really mean by innovation and really trying to set a different agenda in innovation. So we don't see that kind of innovation quite so often as the other kinds. So let me just outline a little bit the objective and the approach of this particular research project we've been doing for the APO. It's really about, as we've said a few times now, about identifying how to improve productivity and innovation culture in public sector environments. The project is partway through examining how innovation reforms have affected the productivity and performance of public sector organizations, including the desired achievement of better and smarter governance. We are taking an innovation systems approach, as I explained in the definition. So we're really thinking about it as a multi-pronged ecosystem, and we're examining the structures and processes, including supportive organizational cultures that will improve the innovative capacity of public services and hopefully generate the desired outcomes. Just to be clear about how we're choosing the cases and examples I'm going to go on and talk about for this project, we've defined it in this way: which innovations demonstrate improvements in productivity and innovation structures, so resources and organizations, or processes, particular activities, or outcomes, actual results for the public sector. And that might be in terms of quality, a better service, effectiveness, a more effective service, and efficiency, one that delivers better for the resources that are going into it. And we've defined improvements in productivity and innovation as where there's a demonstrable improvement in the quality, effectiveness, efficiency, or something else that was desired and was specified by the aims of the innovations. So let me talk now about some of the best practice examples or the cases from the APO members who are involved in this project. Within member economies, there are specific types of innovations, processes, products, services, policies, governance, skill development, organizational structures, conceptual. And we're curious to know, are there some types which are more frequently associated with improved productivity and innovation? The second point here is that within member economies, we're looking for what contextual factors, be they economic, geographic, political, social, what of those are associated with improved productivity and innovation? And thirdly, for multiple member economies, so across member economies now, not within single examples, can we actually build a picture of what seems to support building productivity and innovation culture in the public sector? So this is really about synthesizing the results from multiple APO members to see if we can detect patterns about what supports building this desired thing that we want, a productivity and innovation culture in the public sector. Before I go into the examples and the cases, I just wanted to let you know these are the 12 member economies who have been involved in this research program. Each country has a national expert who's been delivering these great examples of innovation from APO member economies. And going into the best practice cases, let me just tell you what they've been asked to present. It's 3 pages. So the first heading is about describing the innovation and why it's regarded as generating improvements in either structures, processes, or outcomes, or 2 or even 3 of those. That's the first page. The second page is information on the type, sector, level of government, relevant contextual factors, which organisations are involved, perhaps key actors, be they organisations or particular individuals. So that's the second page. And the third page is for each of the national experts to speculate on the list of factors that made this successful. So what was it, something about the actual ideas? Was it something about the government structures or the way it was organized? Was it something about implementation? Were there various geographical factors that came into play? What happened with the outcomes? So as you can see, the national experts on this program are doing a lot of work to find really great cases and examples, best practice examples, for us to then synthesize into an overall picture. So there are so many great examples. I just want to say that it was very difficult. Each of the 12 have submitted 3 case examples. So that's 36 to choose from, and I found it quite hard to get down to just 4, but I tried to choose examples that give you a good sense of the sort of variety of all the different things that are going on. So the first example comes from India, and it's the e-Sanjivani platform, which is a telemedicine program, which is aiming to increase access to healthcare using digital services. And I think one of the really interesting things about this example is you could think that that's quite a small thing, but actually the ripple effects from this and the interaction with a range of other health services has really made this an important innovation for the Indian case. So it started in 2019. It was designed really to revolutionize healthcare delivery through digital means, but it's also strengthened organizational structures for healthcare access and delivery. And it's been very centrally coordinated to establish a coherent national healthcare framework. So it addresses some specific geographic healthcare disparities that occur in India because doctors tend to be located in urban areas while the population lives in rural areas, and there's some significant hospital overcrowding issues. So the improvement that came out of this e-Sanjivani platform is that the doctor-patient ratio has improved There's been millions of teleconsultations. It has seen a reduction on hospital burdens because people have been able to use this instead of going to hospital. It means that people don't have to travel to see a doctor. There's more specialist access in rural areas again because people don't need to travel, and a greater connection between primary healthcare delivery and specialist medical services. The context here was related to central leadership by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, who were in charge of policy and funding, and the Centre for Development of Advanced Computing, who were in charge of the technical development. And I think it's really important, as our author here, Rishikesh Vinayakpatanka, discussed, the partnership between those two organisations was really important, as was collaboration with medical colleges, specialist hospitals, and integration with digital mission to really unify health records and coordinate with state health systems. It also seems there was a very strong ability to evolve continuously, and there was quite a lot of flexibility built into the system, so it could change as it was being developed, and digital inclusion for very diverse linguistic groups and literacy levels was really important, along with integration with medical supply chains. So I think this is a really interesting example of something that you could think of as quite small innovation, but then actually through linkage to various other things turned out to be actually quite significant in terms of its reach and effects. A second example is from the Philippines. And I would say that this is more a kind of a capacity building innovation and policy laboratory or example. So the innovation here is the development actually of a lab, the setting up of a lab, which is related to the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, to transform how research drives public decision making in a specific area of agriculture, aquatic, and natural resources. So it's both a physical and a digital hub providing training in policy analysis and strategic planning. It does some monitoring and evaluation. It enhances people's policy advocacy skills and engages stakeholders in events to turn evidence into actionable solutions. The improvement is in the almost 500 people who've been trained in various skills since the lab started. It's produced a lot of actionable policy briefs and recommendations, and it's hosted collaborative events resulting in innovative solutions for problems that have long been around, but people haven't really known how to address them. The context that was regarded as important here was a number of changes at the national level, particularly the National Innovation Act of 2019, and National Innovation Council, and other institutions at the national level, and a clear commitment, I think, here from departments to work with universities and R&D organisations and the private sector. So the success factors mentioned in this case by Dr. Eileen were national leadership, networked and inclusive view of innovation, partnerships across government, universities and private sector, and the lab itself being integrated with national innovation strategies and a really clear focus on bridging research to policy. So making sure that all the evidence and great research going on in universities is not lost, but linked to people in government. The third example is from Turkey, and this is more a cultural heritage innovation example. but does very heavily rely on the digitization of archives and documents and objects. So it's a Museum National Information System. In 2023, there was this movement to modernize museum services to protect cultural heritage while ensuring data accuracy, ease of access, resource efficiency. And it was also to increase transparency in public financial management of these museums and archives, and to combat illicit trafficking of cultural objects. So the improvement has been that a digitized version of this cultural heritage has been made accessible to millions of citizens who did not have access previously. So more than 1 million artifacts have been digitized. That's around half. They're still in progress. They've also been training and improving the digital skills of personnel. 1,500 people have had some kind of training, and active monitoring of smuggling incidents for 21,000 artifacts. So some very important stuff to protect cultural heritage, I think, in this example of innovation. The context was a national level policy on development plan and AI strategy, an e-government strategy and digital Turkey roadmap. So all those digital things, very important in this case, plus a national smart cities strategy and cybersecurity strategy, all important part of the context here. And our national expert from Turkey thought that the integration with the president's monitoring mechanism took a very strong interest in this, and strong institutional ownership from the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, and collaboration with the project and the Scientific and Technological Research Council were all terribly important, as were flexible access approach that had to really decide how to balance open and restricted access for different artifacts in this archive. So the fourth example I wanted to talk about comes from Vietnam, and it's Da Nang City and Smart and Digital Governance example. So from 2010s onwards, there's been a general adoption of e-government systems and smart city models across Vietnam. There's several points there that talk about e-government, which involved full digital processing of administrative documents and smart city platforms with 160 digital applications. There's been citizen feedback and participations, with residents able to submit options, complaints, and suggestions. There's been data integration and local governance, so a city data centre to support evidence-based policy, and digital workforce development, so digital literacy training for public officials. So the improvement in this case in Da Nang was linked to their own indexes that they're using to track innovation in Vietnam. One of them is the Public Administration Reform Index, which Da Nang is doing well on, is in the top 5. And the Digital Transformation Index, it's topping for Vietnam. So that seemed to be the improvement in this case. The context, key national strategies on digital and technological innovation, organizational and process innovation, and people and cultural innovation. And the success factors nominated in this case were that innovation was institutionalized as a governance principle through national policies driven by central government. I wanted to finish just with the case of Mongolia, and not to drill into a particular case as I have in the previous 4, but to show you this is a kind of an internal synthesis of cases that our national expert for Mongolia, Yuribol Bayara, submitted. I think was really interesting because it shows you to some extent the kind of range of innovation types across the 3 chosen cases. There's a digital innovation, there's an accountability and citizen feedback innovation, and there's a physical co-location and integration of front-end services in one. The primary goals differ for those 3 things. So the first one, e-Mongolia, is about efficiency and transparency. The 1111 Centre is about responsiveness and trust. And the third is about accessibility and convenience. This is a one-stop shop. Across the levels of government, we can see that the first 2 were national and cross-sector, while the third one was actually a municipal level innovation, but with national participation. And the success factors here for the first one in Mongolia, the legal framework and the data interoperability that was available was really important. For the 1111 Centre was political leadership and the transparency. And for the one-stop shops, the citizen-centric design and interagency coordination were very important to the success. And in the last row, he's included some impact, which talks about how many digital transactions, millions of digital transactions have been used in the first case. In the middle case, 1111 Centre, 93% complaint resolution rate. And in the third case, 1 million annual transactions with 91% of satisfaction. So that gives you kind of an idea of where we're going from the individual cases to try and produce a synthesis, and then that synthesis goes up to the whole 12 members who've been involved in this research. So this research is almost complete. We're getting towards the end. I've seen all of the national experts, the 12 national experts' first draft of the report, and some of the early things that seem to be fairly clearly coming out of this are summarized on these slides. So there's fairly clearly 2 major things, and there is some nuance, of course, under these, but broadly, there are 2 types of innovations that seem to come up in pretty much all of the 12 member economies. And one is a very strong focus on digital. So lots of examples of e-government, digital services, the use of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and related to that, digital skills enhancements for public officials working in these member economies. The second is really a strong focus on citizens, so a citizen-centric view of innovation. Lots of examples of trying to more directly engage with citizens, being more transparent about services and being more accountable, I guess, is part of that. Integrated services, so the sort of one-stop shops or joined-up services, quite a few examples of that. And a number of these are really focusing on just improving access to various services. Digital plays a big part in some of this, but that's not always the thing. Really a strong focus on things to do with that citizen focus, I'd say. And then what are some of the key drivers that we seem to be seeing? I think each of those 4 examples probably ticked all of these boxes, the 4 examples I've just showed you. So you definitely see the importance of a national policy level settings on innovation and leadership at the top level. So it wasn't just kind of someone made a statement and then nothing happened. There was a kind of sustained interest and sustained funding coming from the national level to support these innovations to actually become, to generate improvements. Coordinated governance arrangements turned up in, I think, most of the cases that I've read in depth to date. So you will see in the examples, we mentioned often partnerships. We mentioned about 2 or 3 organizations working closely together. We talked about policies from different national level departments and the need for them to work together. So that came through really strongly, as did this need for robust research infrastructure and evidence-based policy, with quite a few examples of people nominating those as really key drivers for why public sector innovation happened. And then finally, the capability building part of this. Key drivers were really training and development and skills and that culture of learning in public sector environments. That turned out to be really important part of lots of these innovations and how they were implemented. So just to round out where we are at the moment, we're getting close to the end, as I said. And here's some early thoughts on what seems to be supporting building an innovation culture. Firstly, knowing and communicating why it's important for the public sector to innovate. It's about efficiency, it can be about effectiveness, quality, transparency, accessibility. There's a lot of reasons for wanting to build an innovation culture, but knowing what those reasons are and clearly communicating them seem to be very important for success in these innovations. The second one is about that national level policy and creation of innovation departments, innovation units, in some cases within departments, maybe an innovation minister, which happens in some countries. So it's not simply about saying we're going to let the private sector do everything and we don't have to have those kind of skills internally, and we don't really need to be experts at how we do innovation internally. I think that, the need for these kind of internal structures came through very clearly in many of the examples, the best case examples. Thirdly, understanding that it really is an ecosystem with many parts that are connected. So it's about networks or joining the groups together who need to work together. It's about being clear about who should be involved and what their role is. And that's, a small example can become a really big example if there's attention paid to the broader system in which a particular innovation is operating. Next is flexibility to collaborate internally and externally. So public sector organizations are sometimes, and quite often I would say, characterized as overly bureaucratic and too rigid. So public officials who have the ability to be flexible and to work across departmental boundaries and to work, with private sector partners and citizens and social enterprises and everything else is really important, because that's often where some of these great innovative ideas come from. Sustained attention to innovation initiatives. So not just announcing something and then giving it a certain amount of funding and then the whole thing disappearing. is really important. If it's not salient in people's minds and there's no top-level leadership continuing to say this is important and this innovation is really needed for us, that really is unhelpful in building an innovation culture. Related to that is funding for new initiatives and new units, new initiatives. If you're asking departments, individuals working in those departments, public officials, just to do innovation on top of all the other work they're doing, that really doesn't give them much chance to spend the time and effort that it needs to think about, new ways of solving problems. And then some important capability things, I think. It was interesting that the training and development for public service staff in terms of digital skills or policy training or design thinking, new ways of approaching problems, came through quite strongly in the best case examples. And something very striking, at least to me, was the ability to learn from others. There's a lot of innovation going on in APO member economies, lots of great examples. And, it's fantastic. I think that the APO is supporting this piece of research because it's a great opportunity for the member economies in APO to learn from all this great, exciting, innovative work that's going on. So that's the end of my presentation, and I think we're now going to have some questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Jenny, for insightful presentations. So we will now begin our question and answer session. I think the first question, it's always, what is, we can talk about what's the difference of private and public sector, especially what is the difference about innovation in public sector compared to the private sector?
Okay, thanks, Anna. I think one of the things that people usually say in terms of the major differences are about the fact that in the private sector, where everything is about a profit and it's private capital, it's not such a risky undertaking as it is in the public sector. Because if you're in charge of public funds, then things that are seen to be too out of the box, too far from standard procedures, too risky perhaps, that becomes an issue for people in the public sector. It becomes an issue for governments who need to be accountable for how they're spending public funds, and it becomes an issue for all the people doing jobs who may then become very risk averse because part of their job at least is to be very concerned about making sure that citizens are getting what they expect from their government.
Thank you. So then it comes to why is it important for those governments to prioritize innovation as a core responsibility?
Yeah, I think we've seen over the last 2 to 3 decades a much greater sense that we're facing as societies a lot of very big intractable problems, and governments have to be a part of the solution to those problems. So obviously climate change is one of the very clear examples of something that we're really grappling with at a global level. And governments have a really important part to play in this. And I think the days when we sort of thought, well, governments really only have to innovate in the case of market failure, I think that attitude has pretty much been replaced by that notion of the kind of ecosystem that everyone is in this together, that the public and private sector and citizens and all kind of social movements need to be involved in this. And governments really do have a duty to not just engage in this because they have an important role, but to make sure that they are making the best of public funds, using those funds wisely, whether it's by, becoming more efficient in what they're doing or doing new and different things or improving the quality of services. All of these things require some kind of innovation from where we are in very problematic areas. Even small things can be quite important and require some sort of new and innovative approaches. And I think that governments generally are now saying, we need to be part of this rather than leaving it to others to do.
Thank you, Jenny. And the governments, it's always there's so many different types of innovations. And so what types of innovations do government typically implement? And today you presented there's so many different the best practices of APO member economies. So of course one shoe doesn't fit all. So please more talk about what type of innovations and also the typically implement in the current modern governments.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's quite difficult to really characterize because there's so many great things going on and so many different things. But there's a few core things that I think we can see. So the digital transformation in the last 10 to 20 years, particularly 5 years even, has been a massive impetus behind many of the innovations that governments have been implementing. It's driven, changes in services, which is a big type of innovation for many governments. They're either directly or indirectly involved in providing services for their citizens. And so digitization of some of those services and just making lots of information more available to citizens than it was before has really been supported by the move to digital and e-government. So there's a lot in that space, and a lot of that is both about the services, the service delivery, but also to the internal processes and structures of government. We're working in very different ways now in all kinds of organizations compared to how we used to 10 years ago. And some of those really produce great efficiencies and actually produce better ways of working, so better quality. So I think, what holds true still from that systematic review from 10 years ago is that the main things are internal structures and processes are changing, and the ability to deliver services in different ways are changing. Those are the two major types of innovation in the public sector.
Thank you, Professor Jenny. And all the countries and nations, APO member economies, they have different needs and different also the priorities and strategy and policy. So in your extensive research experiences, are there any particular policy sectors where national governments are focusing their innovation efforts to improve the productivity?
I think probably it's touching almost everything. In sectors like health, obviously there is a big impetus to do something about the seemingly ever increasing demand for healthcare services based on a whole range of factors, and ways to be innovative about responding to that, whether it's online, digital services like the example we showed from India, or whether it's just about producing apps so that people get better information about where they should be going or how they should be dealing with their own conditions and, who can help them. I would say that health is probably a really big area, but it was interesting also to see some examples from agriculture, and again, that that is partly related at least to climate change as a huge issue that has an impact on many other things. So I would say there's a lot across all kind of policy sectors, but probably if I was to say one that really stood out, I would say that health is probably a policy sector where there's a massive amount of innovation from national governments.
I see. And today we talk lots about the best practices and experiences. For example, and you mentioned that there's the 4 to 5 best practices in APO. So also every those cases there is the difficulties and also the biggest drivers for public sector innovation. So if you just mention the best top 2, the biggest drivers and the biggest difficulty for public sector innovation.
Yeah, I would say probably the biggest drivers relate to that very high level leadership and clear statements about the need for innovation and what is being done about it and support for that. I think that there's possibly nothing worse than that's the opposite to a driver of making a big statement and then not actually backing that up with specific initiatives that people can see that things are actually changing. So I guess I would say I'm kind of answering both parts of that question in one by saying that's one of the biggest barriers, I think, is making a great claim that we're introducing, we're all about innovation now, but then not having a specific set of initiatives to actually deliver change to people. I'd say that's the biggest barrier, if there's like a great statement, but then no specific initiatives. But the biggest driver is for sure that commitment at the highest level and funds to follow that.
Thank you. And there is many people, and especially the private difference of private and public sectors. They think, innovation can be the quick innovations, or it takes so much time. So, from your perspective, how can we judge whether innovation has been successful, and how long does it usually take for public sector?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer. It's some things will happen quite quickly, and I guess we've still fresh in our minds as all the examples of COVID and how quickly things happened in relation to having to deal with everybody needing to leave the office or everybody needing to be vaccinated, as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So some of those were new approaches that people had never really taken to things before, and they happened very quickly, and the results happened within a few years. On the other hand, there's other kinds of innovation that will start slowly and then gather momentum. And you see this in some things that look like something quite small, but then that something quite small leads to something else which is connected to it. And after 10, I would say 10 to 15 years, you could see a really massive change over that length of time. So I would think, for something that's really not dealing with a crisis, like the COVID example, but something that's just trying to solve a problem that's been around and needs a lot of attention, I would say it's probably 10 to 15 years before you really see full benefits.
I think it's very practical to say. Usually, the public sector is you have so many different types of impacts and outcomes you have to deal with, And I think because of the time constraint, let's ask the last questions to you. And do we learn more from innovations that succeed or from innovations that fall? Because it's always mostly, if you see there is a best practice and the best how it succeeded, but it's always good to learn from our mistakes. So from your point of view, can you give your comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's really important that we do think about the innovations that fail, and particularly because innovations that fail are people, as you were saying, and how people talk about the successes, but they don't really want to talk about the failures. And yet, someone's failure might just need a small tweak, and it can be successful in the same nation or in a different nation in a slightly different context. So it's really important to think of those innovations that fail. And some people writing about this innovation and innovation policy and innovation in the public sector would say that, you know, there has to be failure first before we really get to the point where we actually say, okay, something seriously needs to be done about this. And so a failure will then be immediately followed by a success.
Yes, I think it's a very true, and Professor Jenny, thank you once again for sharing your expertise and valuable insights with all APO member economies and beyond. So today's session highlighted the importance of innovation for public sector productivity and how governments can strengthen the system's capacity and culture for deliver better outcomes. So thank you all to all our viewers for joining us. Thank you, Jenny. We
Thank
look
you.
forward to welcoming you again in our next APOP talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.